Joshua chapter 5 verse 13. And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and, behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him, and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries? Joshua chapter 5 verse 14. And he said, Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? Joshua chapter 5 verse 15. And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. When the man identifies himself as the captain of the host of the Lord, Joshua immediately falls on his face and worships him. Most Bible commentaries identify him as the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, and I agree with them. Joshua would not have worshipped anybody but Jehovah himself. It is interesting that the stranger does not identify whose side he is on. It reminds me of a famous saying by heavyweight boxing champion Joe Louis during World War II. We're going to do our part, and we'll win because we're on God's side. Joshua should have asked, Are you for Jehovah, or against Jehovah? One thing guaranteed, whether we win or lose, depends only on whether we are on God's side. I believe the name of Jericho itself helps us identify this stranger's identity. Jericho, Ur-I-Ko, its month, or else fragrant. Jericho or Jericho, a place in Palestine, Jericho. Hitchcock's Bible Names Dictionary is even more specific about the name of Jericho. His moon, his month, his sweet smell. Nisan is the month Jesus dies for the sins of the world. How appropriate it was for Mary, so many centuries later, to also fall at his feet and anoint him with sweet-smelling ointment. Nisan was the month Mary anointed Jesus to prepare him for his burial. Nisan is the month Jesus was crucified, and Nisan is the month he was resurrected from the grave. John chapter 12 verse 3. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Later, in chapter 6 of the book of Joshua, the stranger with the sword is plainly identified as the Lord. This is a meeting of great spiritual significance. Joshua, Yehoshua, meets face to face with the pre-incarnate Jesus, Yehoshua. It reminds me of the passage in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 13:11. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. Remember that Moses changed O'Shea's deliverer name to Joshua. Jehovah saves. Joshua is suddenly meeting his namesake face to face. Suddenly, Joshua is placed in the same position as Moses before him. Right before the conquest of the land of Canaan, Joshua is speaking with the Lord face to face. Numbers chapter 12 verse 5. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud, and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. Numbers chapter 12 verse 6. And he said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I the Lord will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. Numbers chapter 12 verse 7. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. Numbers chapter 12 verse 8. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Similitude. Temunah. Something portioned, that is, fashioned, out, as a shape, that is, phantom, or, specifically, embodiment, or manifestation. Image, likeness, similitude. We understand from this passage that Moses did not hear from Jehovah in dreams or visions, but he spoke to the embodiment of Jehovah. Now suddenly, on the day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Joshua was also speaking with the Lord face to face. Therefore, the Lord could give Joshua detailed commandments about what Joshua and the children of Israel were required to do next. Joshua chapter 6 verse 2. And the Lord, Jehovah, said unto Joshua, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. Joshua chapter 6 verse 3 And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. Joshua chapter 6 verse 4 And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. Joshua chapter 6 verse 5 And it shall come to pass, that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout. And the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up every man straight before him. Jehovah plainly tells Joshua that he is going to give Jericho to him. The Lord gives Joshua some detailed instructions. If you are not familiar with the Bible, these instructions may appear to be strange and nonsensical, but if you are familiar with stories in the Bible, these instructions make perfect sense. The children of Israel were about to wage war, not in the flesh, but in the spirit. First, when we walk around or through an area, we are claiming it in the spirit. Genesis chapter 13 verse 17 Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Joshua chapter 18 verse 8 And the men arose, and went away. And Joshua charged them that went to describe the land, saying, Go and walk through the land, and describe it, and come again to me, that I may here cast lots for you before the Lord in Shiloh. Second, blowing the ram's horn or shofar represents trusting in God's grace. The children of Israel could not take Jericho by their own strength or effort. They must simply trust that Jehovah would give them Jericho as he promised them. Genesis chapter 22 verse 13 And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. Genesis chapter 22 verse 14 And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Jehovah-Jireh, Yehovah, Yireh, Jehovah will see to it. Jehovah-Jireh, a symbolical name for Mount Moriah, Jehovah-Jireh. Jehovah will see to it. If Jehovah promises something, he will perform it. If God promises to give us something, we simply acknowledge his promise by claiming it, then patiently and expectantly wait for him to provide it to us. Third, they walked around Jericho for 7 days, and on the 7th day, they blew the shofar 7 times. Remember that the number 7 represents completeness, wholeness, blessing, and rest. God always seems to ask us to perform an act of faith. He is not asking us to work for his grace, but he always wants us to trust him and step out in faith. He may ask us to build an ark, or to cast out a net, or he may simply ask us to tie a scarlet cord in our window. The children of Israel were going to be witnesses to a direct intervention by Jehovah. Most of Jericho's fighting men were probably on the walls of the city preparing for what they believed would be an imminent attack. How perplexed they all must have been while watching the armies of Israel silently marching around the walls of the city day after day. The armies in Jericho were prepared to fight a physical battle, but they were not prepared to fight a spiritual battle. Finally, on the 28th day of Nisan, the armies of Israel march around the walls of Jericho 7 times. The priests blow the shofar one last time and Joshua tells all the people to shout. Joshua chapter 6 verse 16 And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Shout, Ruah, Tamar, especially by breaking, to split the ears, with sound. That is, shout, for alarm or joy. Blow an alarm, cry out, destroy, make a joyful noise. Shout, for joy. Sound an alarm, triumph. The children of Israel began shouting for joy before the battle even started because the outcome was preordained. They were on Jehovah's side, therefore, they were on the winning side. The walls of Jericho come tumbling down, probably with most of Jericho's fighting men tumbling down and being crushed beneath its fallen stones. Perhaps most important, one part of the wall did not fall down. Remember that Rahab's house was located on the wall. God honored the promise of the 2 spies and he spared Rahab's house and everybody who took refuge in her house. Joshua chapter 6 verse 22. But Joshua had said unto the two men that had spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman, and all that she hath, as ye swear unto her. Joshua chapter 6 verse 23. And the young men that were spies went in, and brought out Rahab, and her father, and her mother, and her brethren, and all that she had. And they brought out all her kindred, and left them without the camp of Israel. It appears that we do not have to be physically on God's side, as long as we are, spiritually, on God's side. I believe the world and everybody in it is about to go through some significant changes. If you like my videos, please subscribe for notification of future content. Thank you.